The country at large has only been paying attention to Governor Walker for about 10 days. I think that includes Republicans and Democrats across the country. He's somebody people are just learning about now. He's not somebody who has been famous. But in terms of Republican Party institutions, the actual Republican Party and its structure, they are all over Scott Walker as a phenomenon. When you go to the Republican National Committee website right now, they are so not together that they are still on the right side, on one side of their screen, selling Fire Pelosi mugs and gifts. What? You want to fire her as minority leader, too? Yeah. But the thing that doesn't change at the front page of the RNC website at GOP.com is, you see right there, help stop Obama and his union bosses. That's their permanent front page icon right now. You click on it, it takes you to a page titled Wisconsin Fight, a fight we must win. They're nationalizing the Scott Walker fight to bust unions, and they're trying to turn it into donations for the Republican Party. The Republican Governors Association, as well, immediately jumped in to support Scott Walker with a petition that they set up at standwithscott.com. That has since launched a host of Republican imitators, standingwithscott.com, also standwithwalker.com, all very original. But the Republican Governors Association was first. The Republican establishment has decided that Governor Walker is their guy for the country. You've got the Wisconsin party chairman running the party now. You've got the new Wisconsin governor, who nobody had ever heard of before 5 minutes ago, picking this fight that the Republican Party is doing everything it can to nationalize. They want to make this fight, and they want to make Scott Walker the face of the party. The Wisconsin Fight page at the RNC website says Scott Walker's anti-union fight there is a battle for America's future, a battle that just happens to require you to give money to the RNC. In terms of the Republican Party figuring out who the leader of its party is, the leader of that party is post-Bush, post-McCain, the great Republican Party identity crisis of the 2000s, who they want you to think of when you think Republican now, they have picked this guy. And he knows it. When he was speaking with somebody on the phone who he thought was a conservative billionaire named David Koch, but who actually was a gonzo journalist from Western New York named Ian, Governor Walker made clear that even though most of America is just now figuring out who he is, he sees himself as the vanguard of the new Republican Party.
I talk to Kasich every day. You know, John's got to stand firm in Ohio. I think we can do the same thing with Rick Scott in Florida. I think Snyder, if he got a little more support, probably could do that in Michigan. I mean, you start going down the list, you know, a lot of us, there's a lot of us new governors who got elected to do something big.
You're the first domino.
Yep. This is our moment.
I am the first domino. If that isn't a clear enough sign about his, if not delusions of grandeur, at least his allusions to grandeur. Governor Walker also with fake David Koch on the phone and at press conferences and in a recent interview with the Heritage Foundation and every other time anybody gets anywhere near him with a microphone, Governor Walker cannot stop comparing himself to Ronald Reagan. Republicans really want this guy to be the new Ronald Reagan. He sees himself as the new Ronald Reagan. He talks about himself constantly as the new Ronald Reagan. That overlooked little institution known as the Republican Party is building their national strategy, their national reconstruction around what's going on in Wisconsin, around Wisconsin Republicans, under the leadership of Reince Priebus, the guy who used to run the party in that state, and around the idea of Scott Walker. This fight to strip union rights is how they are trying to rebuild the National Republican Party. And this fight to strip union rights in Wisconsin that they are building everything on, this fight is not going very well. And that would just be a state-level story about Wisconsin if this was a state-level story about Wisconsin. But it is the Republicans who have decided that this is a national fight and therefore a national story. So their failure here has national implications. This is day 10 of this story dominating national headlines. The newest poll today out of Wisconsin shows a majority, 56% of likely Wisconsin voters are against what Walker's doing. They're against stripping collective bargaining rights. They are against this fight the Republicans have picked. Walker just won the governorship there 3 months ago, and the state is already against his big signature idea. Nationally, it's even worse. 61% overall oppose what Scott Walker is doing. That kind of plan. It's not working. In terms of Walker calling on all those Republican governors who he says are going to join him, Republican governors he thinks are going to follow in his big Reagan-esque footsteps or whatever, Those governors are not following his lead. They, in fact, are bailing. Indiana Governor Mitch Daniels, who Walker name-checked to the fake billionaire on the phone, Mitch Daniels called Republicans in his state to yank their union-stripping legislation that they had put forward. Quoting from today's Washington Post, Walker is now calling for other governors to join him in fighting unions. But there aren't many takers so far. In addition to Daniels, New Jersey Governor Chris Christie and Iowa Governor Terry Branstad have now become the latest governors to balk at going after the unions. They joined Mitch Daniels, Michigan Governor Rick Snyder, Florida Governor Rick Scott, and Pennsylvania Governor Tom Corbett in shying from that battle. Walker sees himself as a leader. The National Republican Party clearly is trying to make him into a national Republican leader here. But are you still leading if there's nobody behind you? Not only is this fight not catching on nationwide, but the strategy in the state of Wisconsin is failing. When the governor got punked with that prank phone call, he gave away the strategy he was going to use to try to trick Senate Democrats into coming back into the state so they could get a quorum to pass his union stripping bill. He gave away the trick. He told it to a guy he thought was a big donor. And now the Democrats know what that strategy is, so they will not be tricked. The Senate Republicans in Wisconsin also had a plan to all but force the Democrats to come back to the state. They were going to bring up a voter ID bill, a bill that would make it harder to register to vote. It would hurt Democratic chances not only in the next election, but in every election to come. That was their big threat to get Senate Democrats to come back. They were going to pass this voter ID bill, right? They blew it. In order to pass without any of the Democrats there, they had to make it so the bill had no fiscal impact. In order to make it so the bill had no fiscal impact, they had to change the bill to make it so blatantly unconstitutional that even they had to admit it was unconstitutional, and they yanked it before they even got to vote on it. They're blowing it. We also heard Governor Walker bragging to David Koch about how the protests were dwindling, right? The protests were getting smaller. He was saying this in an encouraging way to this man he thought was his billionaire conservative donor. But if you believe the protesters today, the protesters say today was their biggest day of protesting yet in Wisconsin, with not only thousands of people still in Madison for yet another day, but people also protesting against Governor Walker and his union stripping plan in 18 other cities in Wisconsin. There aren't all that many cities in Wisconsin. I'm using the word cities loosely. In terms of opposition, it is getting smaller. It is not only not getting smaller, it is getting bigger. The Wall Street Journal has a great piece today about how all of these different unions that sort of hate each other. That's how it is in liberal politics. All these unions that sort of hate each other, public sector unions, private sector unions, rival unions that have been competing over trying to organize the same groups of workers. These unions who usually do not get along, in this case, have decided to put aside all of their differences. They have all become unified around this fight, and they are all willing to spend millions of dollars collectively to capitalize on this Republican overreach in Wisconsin on an issue where the public is actually with the unions. Anecdotally, as a liberal person who happens to know a few liberals, there is nothing that liberals want to talk about right now more than this situation with Scott Walker in Wisconsin. This thing in Wisconsin has energized the left, energized the Democratic Party specifically toward addressing and taking care of its traditional and neglected base in a way that nothing any Democrat has done in recent memory has been able to pull off. Scott Walker is the man the Republican Party proper wanted to lead them. Turns out he is the man who is uniting the left in America. This is the fight by which they thought he would lead Republican politics in the 2000s. And you know what? The two big headlines today were huge protests and Madison police chief troubled by Walker's comments on protesters. This is what this is how it is ending. The governor's comments coming in a prank phone call and not objecting when the prank phone caller suggested seeding troublemakers in the crowd to try to make things seem worse than they were in Wisconsin. Today, the headlines after 10 days of protests in Wisconsin are that the protests are bigger than ever and that the Madison police chief would please like a word with the state's irresponsible governor. How's the politics of this working out for you guys? Union bashing for stardom in the Republican Party. Governor Chris Christie of New Jersey kind of started it. This new Wisconsin governor, Scott Walker, then jumped in with both feet. with mixed results so far. But mixed results be darned, there is a theory on the right that there's rocket fuel in that union-busting stuff disguised as fiscal responsibility. And you know who is a Republican politician who needs rocket fuel in the worst way? It's former Minnesota Governor Tim Pawlenty. Tim Pawlenty, T-Paw. According to Chris Good at The Atlantic, Tim Pawlenty wants in, even as most other ambitious Republicans are starting to catch on that they are glad Scott Walker went first with this thing in a big way because it sure is starting to look like a loser of an issue. Not Mr. Paw, Mr. T Pawlenty. He has launched an online petition asking his supporters to support Scott Walker. He says, the gig is up for public employees. The gig is up. He says stuff like that now, Mr. Pawlenty. It is to make him more exciting as a viable candidate. Joining us now is Democratic Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett. Mayor Barrett ran against Governor Scott Walker in the 2010 Wisconsin gubernatorial race and would never be as rude or crass as I was as to make fun of Mr. Pawlenty for being boring, so my views should not be ascribed to him. Mr. Mayor, thank you for joining us.
It's my pleasure.
What is your assessment of how this is going to resolve in Wisconsin? How do you think this is going to end?
Well, I don't think we know the answer to that yet. And really, it's going to depend on those 14 state senators who really surprised a lot of people because the governor and the Republican legislature really had a steamroller going. They introduced the bill a week ago Friday, actually 2 weeks ago tomorrow, and it looked like it was going to pass. And all of a sudden, the 14 senators said, we're not going to do this. We're not going to allow this to happen. And it really wasn't the fact that public employees were being required to pay towards their pensions or health care. It was this attack against the fundamental right to organize and bargain, which just sent them over the cliff and literally out of the state. That's where he overreached. He clearly overreached by attacking the workers' fundamental right to organize and bargain.
Why do you think that the protests in Wisconsin are getting bigger and not smaller? We saw substantial protests today in something like 18 sites across the state, including continued large protests at the state capitol. Why are the protests not waning? Why are they waxing?
Because what's happening now is that people around the state of Wisconsin are beginning to recognize what this is all about. In that phone call that you referenced, when he thought he was talking to David Cook, he never once mentioned a fiscal crisis, and that's how he presented this to the people of the state of Wisconsin, that he had to do this because it was a fiscal crisis. But if you listen to that transcript, or if you listen to that conversation with David Koch, never once does he talk about a fiscal crisis. He talks about getting on national TV shows. He talks about how this is his moment. He compares himself to Reagan. It's all about the cause. He is delighted to be in the middle of an ideological war. That's what this is all about. It's an ideological war to try to crush labor, and he's proud to be part of it.
Governor Walker says that this shouldn't come as a shock to anyone. He said he told everybody that he was going to do this. I know you ran against him for governor for November's elections. Do you think it was widely understood in Wisconsin that this was his agenda, this is how he was going to govern?
Well, I'll tell you what his winning argument was when it came to public employees was that they should pay more towards their health care and their pensions. And I actually agree with that. And the unions agree with that now. They didn't agree with it at first, but they agree with it now. The people in the state of Wisconsin agree that public employees should pay more to their pensions and health care. But this whole notion of attacking public employee unions and stripping people of the right to organize came out of thin air in the last 3 weeks. This was never discussed. And I'm telling you, I was out there on the campaign trail. Never once did it come up. But somehow in the last 3 weeks, that's where this came from. In December, after the election, he made a reference to decertifying unions, but it was only really after the Super Bowl, and he talked about dropping the bomb. That's how he described in that conversation, is that they decided to drop the bomb. Well, he's right using those warlike analogies, because this is really, no question about this, this is an ideological war. And back to your question, that's why people are upset. They realize that there has been ideological war declared right here in Wisconsin, and I don't know how it's going to end. I don't know who blinks first.
Let me ask you one question about Milwaukee. You, as mayor of Milwaukee, Scott Walker was county executive there, of course. Are you still in Milwaukee cleaning up after his firing all the security officers there and replacing them with that private company who put a guy with a criminal record in charge? We reported on that a couple nights ago on this show.
Right, and what happened, there were a couple things that happened. First, when he first replaced the county workers with this group, they had to literally bring people in from out of state. So here's a guy who talks about creating jobs. People who live here in Milwaukee lost their jobs. They had to bring people in from out of state. You made reference to the fact that the manager had a criminal record. There recently was a decision that said that was illegal, and now the county's been required to pay back the workers who lost their jobs. They're back on their jobs, so we are still cleaning up that mess. And that's what my concern is that those concerns are going to start showing up at the state level as well.
Yeah, if that was round one, round two at the state level will not be pretty. Milwaukee Mayor Tom Barrett, it's nice to have your insight on this, sir. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
The Republican Party has a brand new pickle. Having beat the drum for months and months and months and months and months about a supposedly disastrous socialist, communist, fascist, anti-capitalist, tyrannical move by Tsar Obama I. The move in question that they were beating that drum about, turns out it totally worked. It was about jobs and the economy, and it is a good news story. It paid off in a hugely capitalist, for-profit, let's all make oodles of private sector money kind of way. Into the deafening Republican silence about that, we will wade next. Please stay tuned.